Hello, this is Bill Morgan, president of Parker University, and today I have the chiropractic legend Tom Hyde visiting today. Tom, it's great to have you here with us today.
Thank you, Bill. It's really nice to be here, and I'm not sure I'm a legend anywhere, but maybe in my own mind, as they say.
Well, you're one of the pioneers in sports chiropractic. You were the chiropractor to the Dolphins, to the Marlins. You worked for the Pan Am Games, the Olympic Committee. You really were probably one of the great pioneers in sports chiropractic. Can you tell us a little bit about your history and the history of sports chiropractic as you know it?
Yeah, thank you very much. You give me a lot of credit for some things, and I appreciate that. Actually, we go back as far as Babe Ruth with a guy by the name of Earl Painter, who was a trainer and a chiropractor who took care of him, and this is a long time ago. He took care of Babe Ruth and the Yankees and things like that.
I've got a newspaper clipping showing the newspaper where Babe Ruth's getting adjusted. I got another one with Rocky Marciano getting adjusted, but go ahead.
With a boxer, absolutely,
yeah.
Absolutely. So that's how long we've been involved with sports. I feel like I came along late. I didn't get started until really about 1974 when I became a student, and began there, and then I got out and went to the ACA Sports Council. I think I was recruited to go there sometime in the late 70s or early 80s by John Danchek, one of my mentors and classmate, great guy. So back then, we only had a few hundred members, and at one point we had up to close to 2,000 members in the Sports Council.
Wow.
And we had pretty much every sport that you could name covered, and we had people who were in charge of, let's say, boxing or wrestling or whatever. And then when meets would come up or competitions, those people that were in charge of, say, wrestling would then send out a notice, we've got such and such meet here and there and that kind of thing. If you're interested in joining us, come on along. So we had a lot of those things, and that's changed over the years. But the opportunities now for the young men and women who are getting into sports and chiropractic is just incredible, because back then we weren't involved in the Olympics. They didn't want us. And then they began really, I think, if I remember correctly, about 1983 at the Pan American Games, they invited a chiropractor to the games in Colombia, South America. And then they opened it up finally, the USOC opened it up in 1986 at the Olympic Training Center. And then I went through in 1986 and went to the Pan American Games. And then after me, still in 86, Jan Corwin came along. And Jan went to the 88 Olympic Games, and he actually was the very first person to treat Greg Louganis after he hit his head on that diving board.
I remember that.
You remember that?
Oh, my goodness.
So that was really our foray. But actually before us, in 1984, I think it was, in L.A., they picked a young lady, Eileen Hayworth. So Eileen also went to the games, but she didn't go through the Olympic Training Center, but still she was an integral part of those games way back in 1984. So now we've gotten to the point where we now have a chiropractor head of sports medicine for the United States Olympic Committee. It's really interesting. So we've really evolved.
It's pretty amazing how far that's come. People don't realize what a big deal Bill Moreau being, is that who you're talking about?
Yeah, absolutely.
Amazing. And you, as I said, professional sports teams, what's it like taking care of professional football? And were you the first chiropractor to take care of a professional football team?
No, I was not. I think, and I could be wrong, but I think that might have been actually Mike Reed's father. I think he was the first one to take care of maybe the L.A. Rams or something like that. I started actually in 1990, and that's when Don Shula was the coach of the Dolphins, and then some guy named Dan Marino was the quarterback. So, and I have to tell you a funny story. When he walked into the training room, everybody stopped talking. He was the most respected athlete I've ever been around. He was one of the hardest working people there. He studied the playbook. He expected everyone to be as professional as he was. He was unbelievable. And I got the pleasure of meeting his father and things like that. But the first time I adjusted, I did an AP, thoracic move. And, you know, you hear this noise, this cracking, as they called it. And he screams, "You broke my ribs." And, I mean, all these other people, all the other players are watching me. The athletic trainers are watching me treat Dan Marino. scared me to death. Of course, he was kidding, but that's the kind of guy he was. I
Oh
loved
my
it. But
goodness.
it was a lot of fun. So I had 7 great years there, and then a year with the Miami Marlins, and that was the year they won their first pennant, by the way. Not that it had anything to do with me, or Spencer Barron was there as well. So I don't think it had anything to do with me, but that's the year that I wound up hurting my wrist and had to quit. So that's why I had to give up both of those jobs, just because of an injury.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting. You injured your wrist in a volleyball game, and you couldn't adjust anymore. But eventually, that led to a second career. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, thank you for asking. I met Dick Vincent, one of my all-time favorite mentors on this planet, one of the nicest people you'll ever
I've
meet.
known him for more than 31 years. So
Isn't he the greatest?
He is.
He's fabulous. He and I still talk 2 or 3 times a week. But I guess I was feeling sorry for myself because I couldn't work. I pretty much lost my practice. It was some tough times there for a few years. And I met him at the FCA convention, and he said, listen, I'm working for a Grassland Technique. How would you like to come on and work for us? You can use one hand to use an instrument, and we'll have you go to the schools and try to talk to them about maybe bringing Grassland Technique into the schools, and also help us to get it into the sports arena. So I agreed to do that, and I worked for them for 10 years. And during that time, Greg Dorr, very bright young, you know Greg as well.
He's spoken at Parker seminars. He spoke for us last year in Las Vegas.
And dynamic, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just brilliant young man. He and I co-developed Factor, and Factor is a concept. It's not a technique, and people get that confused sometimes. So what we say is that Factor is a concept that can be used with any technique you already know. So if you know Grassland technique, you can use that. We just add a little more to it. If you use activator, you can use this. If you use Cox flexion distraction, doesn't matter the technique. You can use that technique with the concept. So we'd beat each other up after class. We started this probably within a year or 2 after we started working together, and I think we brought it a long way, and that kind of gave me another chance at this profession, just from a different approach. And I learned more and more about fascia now with the advent of the International Fascial Society. I've been to those. We've learned more about fascia than they've learned 2,000 years before that, within the last 10 or 15 years.
And you and I met you through Dick Vincent, but also at the international fascial conferences, we see each other at those events. So how does myofascial work blend with chiropractic?
Oh, I think it's absolutely incredible and a necessity. And I'll never forget when I started Logan, I had the opportunity to meet Ken Yoakum. That's Terry Yoakum's father. And he had met Raymond Nemo.
That's the soft tissue technique I learned when I was in school.
Absolutely. We learned Nemo, right?
Yeah, Nemo.
Yeah. Well, we used to call
receptor tonus.
Receptor tonus technique. That's right. And he had actually read an article by Janet Travell on trigger points. And he'd already found these, what he called noxious points, and they corresponded. Now, this is when letters were there. There were no computers or things like that, so they would exchange that. So he learned that. But one thing I'll never forget him saying, he came to Logan, and we actually got to take the class from him a couple of times. He was there quite a bit, actually. But he always said that chiropractors always mark bones. They take x-rays. They want to adjust these bones and put them back where they think they ought to be, but they forget it's the soft tissue that takes them out. So you have to also address the soft tissue. So I learned that at an early age. And back then, believe it or not, I spent 18 years competing in powerlifting in the 148-pound class.
Oh, my goodness.
I had a number of injuries, and both times it was soft tissue that fixed my shoulder. One was Nemo technique that John Danchek did. The second time was some young kid that was developing something called active release technique.
Oh, yeah, this
Michael
kid,
Leahy,
yeah,
that guy. So he one treatment again with the soft tissue, and bam, my shoulder problem was gone. So I've gravitated towards that. But yes, I think the two of them are so complementary to each other. So I like incorporating both. If you can do the manipulation, you're adjusting, and then add the soft tissue, I think you've got a winning combo.
Well, here at Parker, we want to produce the best adjusters in the world. That's one of those things that it doesn't matter what I do here at Parker. If you don't come out and you can't adjust, I've failed you. So we're rewriting our curriculum. We're revamping our adjusting curriculum for one, and currently we don't have any soft tissue techniques. what advice would you give me as I'm considering putting a soft tissue technique into our curriculum?
That's a great idea because there are a lot of them out there, I think, that you can look at. Certainly, we talked a little bit about Stecco's work, the fascia manipulation. I think that's a very good one. It's very sound. It's based on research, literature, that kind of thing. I think that's a great one. I know I taught for Graston technique for a long time. They've changed and modified a little bit. I think it's still a good technique for that. I don't want to name all of them, but active release, another one, fabulous. And Michael does a great job with that. Gosh, I like Factor, of course. That's functional and kinetic treatment with rehab. I have to mention a little bit, but again, it's a concept, not a technique. Do you have any others in mind that you're thinking about?
It was odd. I started off as an upper cervical practitioner, and the technique we would do, what I learned, they would actually pre-stress you before we would tap the atlas. And looking back, I wonder if a lot of what we were doing was fascial creep, putting the fascial creep in there before you applying the upper cervical adjustment. So in many ways, chiropractors are already fascist.
I love that. You sound like Warren Hammer.
Yes.
Exactly. That's where I learned that too. Yeah, we're all fascist at heart. Yeah, but it's a different kind. But you know what? You're absolutely right. It's a great combination. And when you do that technique that you're just talking about, yes. And the other thing is you're looking at stimulating the neural system, right? So you talk about neurology when you do an adjustment. But I think you also get that with the fascial. So the combination of both is great. What they're telling us, I think you know now too, that the fascia contains the Golgi tendon apparatus, the mechanoreceptors and proprioceptors and all these things that we used to think maybe were in the muscles, but they're also in the fascia. So the combination of your adjusting and soft tissue, I think, is a win-win.
And the way I look at it, there's different types of subluxations.
Yes.
There's an interarticular subluxation that responds to a quick osseous adjustment. We see in the intertransversarii muscles, the intertraverse muscles, and the rotatory muscles 8 times the number of muscle spindle fibers as in the polysegmental muscles. And muscle spindle fibers respond to a quick adjustment, and you kind of reset the neurology with it. That's a quick adjustment. Myofascial disorders may affect the Golgi tendons, which require a longer, slower technique. You have SOT blocking has a particular tempo or rhythm to it. Flexion distraction, long, slow distractions in myofascial work, they all have their place. And whatever that lesion is, we need to adapt our techniques towards that lesion.
I totally agree with you, 100%. Now, is that what you did when you were working with our armed forces?
Oh, I did. We had, in fact, as you know, I would employ adjustments, myofascial work, Graston. I actually taught for Graston for a bit myself, but I don't know if we've talked about some of the limb salvage cases we had where people were scheduled to have their foot cut off.
Right.
They lost function in their foot. It was stuck in equinus deformation. And if you can't dorsiflex your foot, you can't walk. So they would come to me with 20 degrees dorsiflexion. They can only a negative 20 degrees. They can't get to within 20 degrees. They're doing chiropractic adjustments to the feet, of course, spinal adjustments as well, myofascial release. I've had cases where we've taken from negative 20 degrees dorsiflexion to positive 20 degree, where they're actually restore their motion of their foot through the combination of adjustments and myofascial work so that they can actually cancel their surgery for an amputation.
That's amazing. I mean, your career has been incredible. And I'm telling you, thank you so much for taking care of our wounded and differently abled athletes, the men and women that you've done for how many years now?
Oh, I was, most of my adult life I worked for the Navy, either active duty, the reserves, or 20 years working for them at Walter Reed in Bethesda. Of course, you were a Marine in Vietnam. I always call you Gunny whenever I see you. Probably killed more people than some of the doctors I know. But thank you for your service and Semper Fidelis.
Well, we relied on you guys as hard as it is to admit the Marine Corps is part of the Navy, but we couldn't do without the corpsmen. I can tell you that firsthand. We need those corpsmen there, and we were glad to have people like you who could take care of us when we're out doing our little bit.
Well, thank you, Gunny. It's great to have you here. Great to have you on campus at Parker. Thanks for visiting us.
Thank you, Bill. My pleasure.